Hello and welcome to today's episode of Conquer the Day. I am your host, Lindsay Pickowitz.
And I am your co-host, Brian Pickowitz.
And today we are diving into a practical guide on all things nutrition for busy professionals and business owners like yourself. We want to help you get prepared and feel absolutely confident that this is going to be the year that you optimize your eating habits for energy, for health, and ideally for getting in great shape so that you are performing at your best. We want to make sure that you have everything you need in order to make this a great year of health, and we're going to start with nutrition.
Yeah, and our goal is to really cut through all the noise and make this something that's very actionable. You should be able to listen to this podcast, especially as we're looking at the solutions. We're going to lay out some misconceptions, some challenges you might be facing. But when you listen to this, you should be able to walk away with exactly what you need to do in order to optimize your energy and really start to make progress with your weight loss. And we know that if you're someone who wants to get in shape and wants to make changes this year, nutrition is probably the most important aspect of that productive change. You know, we can talk about fitness, and there's going to be an important podcast we do about the specifics around how to train and how to move your body, but that's such a small portion of our day. And the truth is that most people, they bog themselves down by asking, well, how should I work out and how should I move, without realizing that the majority of the changes that we need to make are with what we put in our body. And when we talk about what we put in our body, it's not as difficult as it might seem. And so today we're going to cut through a lot of the noise. We're going to make this a really practical podcast. And our goal is to add so much value to your journey that you can make this year one of the best that you've ever had, not just because of how you look and what you accomplish with your physical body, but because of the energy that you gain from this.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to start off by identifying the challenges, because we understand what it looks like and feels like to feel extremely busy and like you just don't have time in the day to focus on your nutrition. If you are a business owner or you're in a leadership position at your work and perhaps you have to commute, maybe you work at home, it can feel like your day is already so eaten up that by the time you get to eat, you're starving and you're just grabbing whatever's available, right? But there's really three common challenges that we see consistently in our clients at the Fitness Project. The first one is, like you might imagine, sporadic eating habits, which really means you maybe don't eat breakfast every day, you skip lunch some days, you might eat one meal or 5 meals. It's just different every day, right? It's very sporadic, which also changes your energy levels throughout the day. Some days you're hyped up, some days you're exhausted, and it's just very inconsistent. That's a lag metric of your eating habits.
And that inconsistency often leads us to the second challenge, which is we overeat, right? So we undereat in the morning, and then when we go out to the restaurant with our client or we're in a business meeting, we are snacking or we're adding extra calories that we didn't really want to eat, right? Like the nacho chips or the salsa on the table during the meal that we're just over consuming because we're bored, or there's something on the table and we haven't eaten all day, so we overeat, or we snack throughout the day, not really planning what we're eating, so we're putting all this extra food in our body that we didn't really intend to put in place. But we're just eating because it's there. And I think that a lot of times the reason why we overeat is because we lack knowledge of what is in the food we're putting in our body. So something as simple as the nacho chips or the tortilla chips that are on the table at a Mexican restaurant, it's like, oh, these are just a few chips, without realizing we just added probably 300 to 400 calories to our daily intake. The handful of M&Ms, or the peanut M&Ms, because I think that that's probably a more calorie-dense example of this, we think it's only a handful, but if you really look at it, it's about a serving or two. And so we lack knowledge oftentimes of how many calories are in the foods we're putting in our body while we're snacking. Or when we go out with friends, we don't really pay attention to our portions, or we're eating at a, let's say, an event, right? We think it's just a small portion, but we don't realize that one snack of 300 calories done 2 or 3 times a day is an extra 1,200 calories in our daily intake. And so we have to look at the challenge of overeating as saying, okay, well, am I eating because I don't understand what's in my food, meaning how many calories it actually has? Do I not understand what the portion size actually is? And do I have an adequate amount of knowledge of how to order out at restaurants? Because I don't have to eliminate my life in order to optimize it, right? I don't have to eliminate eating out at restaurants. I don't have to eliminate family gatherings or even my favorite foods, but I do have to build awareness around it. And so if you're someone who's like, oh, I'm trying to eat healthy, I just get overwhelmed and I have the sporadic day, it's like, okay, let's start building some knowledge and awareness around what we're putting in our body. And then we can look at the micro tweaks that we need to make in order to optimize our health and energy.
Yep. And I think that it typically gets brushed over, but another reason that we tend to overeat without realizing we're overeating is we eat to satisfy or change our emotion. And this is what's referred to as emotional eating or stress eating, boredom eating even. These are all eating habits that typically lead to overeating, which is really just eating more than your body actually needs in order to maintain a healthy weight or to maintain a healthy body. So when we say overeating, that's what we mean. Now, this might show up as snacking throughout the day. This might show up as eating at night. But really, if you were to peel back the layers, it's not just that you snack too much. It's that you're bored, right? Or you're not wanting to produce a result at work, or you're overwhelmed at work, so you want to distract yourself, right? So it could be stress eating, it could be boredom eating, but regardless, emotions tend to lead us to overeating, and I think that's one that's easy to brush over or assume we should just never struggle with, when in reality, if you have a business, if you have a high-level career, there's a lot of demand on you. So to desire an escape, a place to have, we'll say, some satisfaction or relaxation or relief is very understandable and very normal, but it's something that we have to work on. Right? If we have to actually acknowledge it and work through it in order to get to the point where our nutrition is optimized.
Yeah, and the key is understanding that awareness is progress. And so as you're listening to this, you might hear, well, I am a sporadic eater, or I don't really understand too much of what I'm putting in my body. The example around that is I have a client that I'm working with right now who's like, oh, I just think anytime I put something in my body that's not in the Whole30, I'm eating in a negative way, or I'm eating bad food. And that's because there's a nutrition knowledge gap. Right. And so the whole process of being able to listen to this and make educated choices afterwards is understanding that there's going to be a lot of awareness you build through this process. And so when we talk about building awareness, we also have to address some misconceptions. Those misconceptions are oftentimes, well, if I'm eating healthier, I'm going to lose weight. Well, I started eating healthy. And it's like you might be eating healthier, but you might still be at a calorie surplus. So you might have made a healthier choice, but you're still eating more calories than what your body needs. And it's really fascinating when you start to pay attention to the marketing of food. The marketing of food is oftentimes what leads us to think that we're eating healthy, therefore we should lose weight, without really diving into the nutrition facts of what's in the product. So for example, something like a healthy chip, it might be healthier because they're using healthier processed foods or processed products in it, meaning they're using olive oil instead of seed oil, or there's not as many we'll say additives for what they're doing for their flavoring. But you're still eating something that has 200 calories per serving. And so if you're not aware of that gap of knowledge, right, meaning understanding what you're actually putting in your body, you might be eating healthier, but you still won't make progress. And that's where a lot of people get frustrated.
A very good example of this in real life was a client that we were working with a year or two ago. She was in this mindset where she was saying, I'm eating really well. I'm doing really well with my diet, but I'm not seeing progress. So a very real example. And I went through her diary of what she was eating, her nutrition diary, and it showed a serving or so of pistachios specifically. She's like, oh, I love pistachios. They're my favorite snack. And I asked her, how many handfuls or servings of pistachios do you think you're eating? And she was like, I don't really know. I just kind of like toss handfuls back throughout the day.
Yeah.
And I made her aware that if you actually weighed out or measured one serving of pistachios, it's like a teeny tiny, like less than a palm size is 200 calories. So if you think a full palm, that's automatically 2 to 3 servings of pistachios, which are about 170 to 200 calories each. That's quickly 600 calories, which is a whole meal, but it doesn't feel satiating at all.
And that's another example of marketing, right?
Yes.
So if you walk through the store, you look at pistachios, their new marketing slogan is the original plant protein. It's like, okay, well, let's look at the nutrition facts. One serving of pistachios has about 16 grams of fat and about 6 grams of protein. So it's an inadequate source of protein, but because of the way we're being marketed to,
right,
we believe that the food is a healthy source of protein. Now, it doesn't mean it's not a healthy source of fatty acids. It doesn't mean it's not a healthier alternative than having a candy bar.
Right.
But if we're not educated on how to actually hit our weight loss goals and how to optimize our energy, we're going to overeat just because we aren't paying attention to what we're really putting in our body. And so another misconception that comes up, though, along that line is that if I just start cooking my own food, I'll make progress. Or if I'm meal prepping, I'll make progress. Without realizing that when you're a professional, you might not have time to meal prep the way you hoped. You might not have time to cook the way you'd hoped. So these two ideas are like, yeah, they're aspirational targets, but can you actually maintain the amount of repetition with your meal prep or with cooking that you need to in order to hit your own defined target?
And what I would say is we are going to handle those two topics of meal prep, cooking at home, eating out. We're going to talk about some principles that will really help you to integrate, we'll say, healthy habits like those, because cooking at home tends to be healthier than eating out, and meal prepping tends to help with eating healthier. However, the real misconception that we're hitting on here is that it's not a rule that if you meal prep, you will make progress. Mm-hmm. It's not a rule that if you cook at home, you'll make progress. Again, if we go back to the truth about nutrition knowledge, you really need a base level of nutrition knowledge of what's in your food, of how much your body needs in order to make physical progress, not just towards general health, but towards specific results. We'll say weight loss results. You do need to have a specific amount of nutrition knowledge about what your body needs. So meal prep and eating at home might sound healthy, but they don't necessarily equate to results. And equally, just because you eat out at restaurants and you don't meal prep doesn't mean that you're sabotaging your progress. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of extra insight so that you don't feel like, okay, I have to change everything about my eating habits this year. I can't eat out anymore. I have to cook every meal at home from scratch with a new recipe. It's like, no, you don't. We're going to simplify it down, but those are common misconceptions that we wanted to hit on before we actually get into the strategy so that you feel like you have some freedom and flexibility with your diet before we even talk about how to approach your diet. Anything else?
And we want to be mindful of one last point, and that is that in this time of change where you're wanting to optimize your energy, you want to lose weight, you're wanting to make these changes for your nutrition, we want to be really mindful of the desire to overcorrect and restrict. Mm-hmm. Like almost if you want to think of yourself as an athlete, right? If you were an athlete who was, in the NBA or in the NFL or in the MLB, whatever sport you love, that person is pushing their body to perform at their best. And if you're performing at your best every day, you're not restricting. You're not sitting at 1,000 calories. You're not sitting at 800 calories. You're fueling your body for the output that you're expecting it to perform. So you might not be an athlete, and that's great. You don't want to eat exactly like an athlete, but you do want to fuel your body in a way that allows you to perform. Mm-hmm. You want to be getting food in your body that allows you to be your best and allows you to have focus and energy. And when we're in a restrictive mindset, especially when we're coming from a place where we haven't put the right habits in place for our diet, if we're going from, let's just call it chaos, right? I'm trying to eat healthy, but I snack and I overeat and I put all this processed food in my body, to now I'm going to try to be perfect. There's going to be a whole slew of habits that we haven't put in place to get to that point. And that's when we start tricking ourselves to think, I need to restrict, I need to just willpower my way. It's like, no, we want to look at what are the right habits, how can we build around those habits, and if we do that in the way that meets us where we're at and allows us to build from that point, we'll find that we're not in restrictive mode, we're actually in fueling mode, and that's where real progress is made.
I love that. It's a very good point. Now,
well, thank you.
As we dive into the strategy, we've set the stage. As we dive into the strategy, who outside of yourself is coming to mind as you're listening to this? Take a second to send this podcast to them. Because one of the ways that you really upgrade your habits is by upgrading your environment. And if you are the person who's seeking out this knowledge and maybe you're married and you have kids, then perhaps sending this to your spouse would be really helpful. If you have a best friend who you love to get fit and healthy with and they care about this area of life as much as you do, send this to them. That's just a small side note as we dive into strategy here, because this is about to get very tactical and practical, that ways that you can implement a healthy diet into your life for 2024 starting now.
Yes.
Okay.
And so on that note, what do you have to do? What do you have to do to actually make progress, lose weight, optimize your energy when it comes to nutrition? Well, there's really a few points that we have to hit home and that we want you to gain from this podcast. The first is understanding that if you want to lose weight, you have to eat at a calorie deficit. And so unless you have some kind of hormonal dysregulation like Hashimoto's or polycystic ovary syndrome or something else where there's maybe an irregulation in your hormones, calorie deficit is key, right? We have to look at how much energy we're putting into our body, which is what we're doing when we're eating food. We're intaking energy. And is it more than what our body can actually process? So if we're not eating at a calorie deficit, we're never going to lose weight. We're going to feel that lethargic energy that happens when we overeat because our body's trying to break down all this excess food. And that's really the first key to look at. And I'm going to kick it back to you as far as like building off of that point. But again, we have to look at how much food we're intaking. And if we want to lose weight, we have to eat a little bit less than what our body needs to maintain its energy source.
Yeah, so if we're taking that principle and we're applying it to, we'll say, what you can implement today, understanding that you have to be at a caloric deficit in order to lose weight for most people is key. But how do you apply that for yourself? What you want to do is figure out what your maintenance level of calories is first. Now, maintenance level is exactly like it sounds. Finding your maintenance level is how much food must you eat with the amount of activity you do to maintain your weight. Now, most likely for most people, it's going to be just above what's called your BMR, your basal metabolic rate. This is something that you can look up, you can calculate pretty easily with a quick Google search, but you want to figure out where is your maintenance. Now, in order to do that, you could track your food in MyFitnessPal for a week or My Macros Plus. You could track your food somewhere. You could calculate your maintenance level. But really, that's the key, is you need to figure out how much food do you need to eat in order to maintain your body. The reason I say that is because if you understand how much food you need to eat to maintain, then you can say, well, what is a slight, moderate deficit that I can put myself at if your goal is weight loss? A slight, moderate deficit is 200 to 500 calories below your maintenance level. Personally, my maintenance level with my level of activity is right around 1,700 to 1,800 calories. If I'm training 2 to 3 times a week, I'm walking a little bit every day, that's my personal maintenance level. If I want to be at a deficit, I might reduce my calories to around 1,600 or so. We share this as a first practical tip because most places that you look for weight loss or diet advice are going to immediately put you at a severe caloric deficit below your BMR, which is the amount of calories or energy you need just to function and live. It might put you at 1,000 calorie deficit, 1,200 calorie deficit, and that's because it's just a simple calculation. It's not looking at what helps you function optimally while you're losing weight. So a slight caloric deficit is key as a first principle, and finding your maintenance level is the first step in doing that.
The easiest way to know if you're at a calorie deficit is to assess your hunger cues at the end of the day. So when we're working with clients, we do want them to track their food at first, and we'll talk more about the value of tracking, not as a lifestyle change, but just as a practical way of building knowledge. But what I often tell people is you should feel about 80% full at the end of the day, maybe 80 to 90%, and that's a good indication that you're at a calorie deficit. If I'm listening to what my body is telling me, it's going to tell me if I am eating too much, right? And we've all experienced that, where I get to the end of the day and I feel bloated, I feel lethargic. I just wake up the next day and my body feels like it is, let's say, over full, right? Whereas if I eat at a calorie deficit and I'm listening to my hunger cues, I want to reach the point where I feel like I could probably eat a little bit more, but realistically, I've eaten enough to be satiated. And this is something we have to train. Right? We do need to train ourselves to listen to our hunger cues, which is really our body's sign of telling us when we've eaten enough. And that can happen over time. We'll make another podcast about how to listen to your hunger cues in time. But the key is understanding if I want to eat at a calorie deficit, I can track my calories, like Lindsay was saying, understand your BMR, but then also tune into what your body's telling you. And that might mean you have to slow down. That might mean you have to enjoy your food a little bit more. But listening to how our body is intaking the food we're putting into it and reaching that point of satiation is really important for the longevity of this change.
And the second principle we want to focus on is eating 80% healthy whole foods. You've heard it before, and you're going to hear it again, but we're going to clarify what this really means when we say 80% of your diet should be healthy whole foods. It is not eating like a rabbit, having more salads, or having more fruits and vegetables necessarily. what would you say are some good examples of what it really looks like to have 80% of your diet being healthy whole foods?
I think the key is understanding that there's a spectrum of what it means to have processed or healthy whole foods. So what we want to think of is a healthy whole food is as close to its natural source as possible. So if I was to find this food on a farm or in the wild, what would it look like? And am I eating it as close to that as possible? Now, the reason why I say there's a spectrum is because there's highly processed foods at one spectrum. You can think of this as baked goods that have added sugar, that have added seed oils or preservatives to keep them shelf stable. And then there's foods that if you were to catch them like in a river or have them on a farm or get them out of a garden, that's what they would look like. So when I'm thinking of that spectrum, most of my diet should fall closer to what I would eat fresh from the farm or fresh from the garden. It doesn't mean it has to be organic, doesn't mean it has to be exactly that way. But if I go to a restaurant and I look at the options, well, I have French fries, which are deep fried and are cut, and they're usually high in preservatives because they've been frozen over time and they need to keep them shelf stable. And then I have a cheeseburger, which has the cheese and the bun and all that stuff. It's like, yeah, I could have that. It wouldn't be the end of the world. It's probably 700 calories. Or I could have a healthy steak with maybe a sweet potato and a small salad, or maybe the greens as an option. And it's like, well, if I look at those two options, the steak is a healthier alternative than the cheeseburger. And I can do that at any point in time throughout my day. If I'm running tight on time, I can stop at the, on the go gas station store and look and say, okay, out of all the options that are in front of me, what's the healthier option that will also meet my calorie needs? So I could have beef jerky, I could have a piece of fruit, I could have a yogurt, I could have a cheese stick, I could have some almonds or some cashews, something like that, as opposed to having a bag of potato chips. So the goal with eating healthier whole foods is that A, I'm going to get more protein. I'm also going to have more fiber, which is going to fill me up more. And in a lot of those options, I'm probably going to increase my water intake too, because vegetables and fruits have more water than, let's say, a bag of potato chips or a baked good. So if I'm eating most of my diet, meaning 80% of the time I'm eating most of my diet closer to that healthy whole food source, yeah, well then 20% of the time I can have a little bit of bread or pasta or rice or maybe even a snack or a sweet or two. Like I still love eating potato chips from time to time. I eat rice cakes. I love eating yogurt. I love having chocolate. Right, I'm a sucker for some watermelons, Sour Patch Kids from time to time, but that's a small portion of my day. And so by focusing on eating mostly healthy whole foods, I'm optimizing my energy, I'm optimizing my digestion, I'm optimizing my cognitive function, I'm giving my body what it actually needs in order to thrive.
I think the key with healthy whole foods that might be different than what you'd assume is that carbohydrates are still a source of healthy whole foods. Plenty of carb sources are healthy whole foods. So to think I just need to have salad eliminates healthy meat sources, healthy carb sources, even healthy fat sources, because you're just thinking I need to get more vegetables. There's so many options when we think healthy whole foods, and I think that's what we want to share with you is that there's a lot of options.
There's a sweet spot where all diets intersect, that they're accurate and truthful. So if I look at the paleo diet and the whole 30 diet and the keto diet and even the vegan diet, there's an intersection where it's like, oh, the optimal diet is something that's close to nature. That's the optimal diet. The optimal diet is also the one I can stick to. So if I'm looking at my current lifestyle and I'm saying, oh, about 80% of what I eat is processed and not whole foods, well, then I want to say, okay, how can I move closer to what would be a 80% of whole foods being my diet? And it might be, hey, I'm a 50-50. That's fantastic. You're moving in the right direction.
Yep.
And the more we can build off that, the healthier we're going to be.
Yep. So that's 2. We've got 3 more for you, I believe.
Yes.
Third, practical piece of application for changing your nutrition habits and your diet in this year is to identify your goal number of healthy meals to have in a day. Healthy meals to have in a day is a great way to optimize your diet, to make sure you're fueled throughout the day, make sure that you're satiated and getting the fuel you need. You do not have to have food every 2 to 3 hours to thrive. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you don't need to eat one meal a day, which is very trendy at this point in time. Intermittent fasting, one meal a day. You don't have to do either of those things in order to eat well and feel good. More likely than not, it's eating 2 to 3 healthy, intentional meals in a day. What constitutes a healthy meal? Simply put, a meal is 400 to 600 calories or so. If it's smaller than 400 calories, it's more than likely a snack, which in the grand scheme of things doesn't really matter, but to have some guidelines is really helpful when you're thinking, okay, I need to sit down and have a meal. You don't literally need to sit. Aim for 400 to 600 calories and make it intentional. Make it intentional. That's going to make a big difference.
And I think the key with understanding the purpose of having meals is that if you're intentionally planning to have 1 or 2 extra meals a day, maybe you don't even eat a meal right now, what it's going to do is it's going to help you feel fuller at the end of the day. I think that's the biggest challenge for people is they snack, they have a part of a meal, they don't really sit down and eat. And so when they get to the end of the day, they're so ravenous that they eat 1,000 calories and they never stop. They eat dinner and they keep snacking all the way through because their body is hungry. So that's really the goal of having meals.
It also impacts your mood.
Yes.
When you're not eating throughout the day, your mood goes up and down. You're more irritable. Even if you're not physically hungry, your mood tends to be less stable if you're not eating throughout the day as well.
And so the next point that we want to start to focus on if we're optimizing our energy and our progress this year is we want to prioritize eating more protein. Now, most people don't eat enough protein, and that's why they're sore after they work out. They also feel hungrier throughout the day. And so when we get protein in our diet, it helps fuel our body from a metabolic standpoint because it takes a little more energy for us to break down protein than it does carbohydrates and fat. And now the benefit of eating more protein is you're not going to see the same insulin spikes. So you're not going to have that jump in energy and that crash. It's going to keep your energy more stable. So ideally, we want to be shooting for about 100 grams of protein just for a generic person. You know, from a how do I build muscle standpoint, roughly 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body mass. So Brian, I'm not talking about myself in the third person.
You are literally, though.
I don't mean to, but I eat, for my body, right? So like the body that I have, I eat roughly 150 to 100 grams of protein per day. When I was competing in bodybuilding, I probably ate closer to 200 to 220 because that was my obsession and focus. But now it's more of a moderate, sustainable approach. But the key is understanding that I want to fuel my body with protein so I actually get the results in the gym that I want. And it's going to allow me to stick to my diet more easily for weight loss. If I'm not eating enough protein, I'm going to be hungry. I'm going to have those energy spikes and dips. I want to be able to ride that wave and really feel full after I eat.
Yep, and that will look like about 35 grams of protein per meal if you're having 3 meals a day.
Yep.
And that would be 4 to 5 ounces of a lean meat source, for an example, at each meal, which isn't really that much. It just has to be intentional.
And you can add in protein shakes. We love Only What You Need as a brand. They're a vegan protein shake. You can also think of eggs, Greek yogurt. There's plenty of options. I think that if you're really optimizing for protein, animal products, animal sources are going to be the best route. Vegan sources aren't optimal, but you could still have beans, legumes, lentils, things like that to hit your protein goals as well.
Yep. Lastly, number 5, take ownership of your environment when it comes to your diet and your nutrition. Now, what does that mean? That's a big statement, but what does it actually mean? We have a lot of examples that have worked well for us, but I think the biggest challenge is we assume that we're going to start changing our eating habits just straight through willpower. If I have some healthy foods in the house, I just need to eat those things. If you haven't done it in the past, there's probably a reason for it. You've built a lot of habits based on your environment, which is the snacks that are in the house, the foods that are easily accessible, the foods that don't require cooking that are easy on hand, ordering Uber Eats. There's a lot of habits that we build just to make sure we're getting food every day. So if you don't change anything about your environment and you think you're going to change your eating habits, you're unfortunately going to set yourself up for failure. Fortunately, there's a lot that you can do it's actually really simple changes that we were talking about earlier that will help you really take ownership of your environment and start to turn the paradigm for yourself and even for your family without it being a huge overhaul.
I think the key to sticking to a diet is not judging yourself for the limitations that you have on your willpower. So, for example, if you were someone who was trying to quit drinking, you wouldn't keep alcohol in the house and say, let's see how well I can test my willpower to do this. You would remove the alcohol. And so if you struggle to stay consistent with your diet, and you're keeping M&Ms in the house, or you're grabbing ice cream and saying, oh, I'm only going to have a little bit. It's like, hey, maybe this season of life is not the right time to test that willpower. Maybe you need to overhaul your environment and remove the food that is the trigger for you to fall off course. Mm-hmm. So, for example, there's a reason why I don't keep ice cream in the house. And it's not because I can't eat ice cream. I don't have an ice cream rule about my diet. The reason I don't keep ice cream in the house is because it's a trigger for me to overeat. Because I'm a big guy. I can eat 3 or 4 servings of ice cream and technically not gain weight. But I know that as soon as it's in the house, I have this proclivity to overeat and overdo it. So I just don't keep it in the house. It's a rule. It's a very simple rule that I follow. And you know what? I'm healthier and happier because of it. Mm-hmm. And so if you see that there's a certain food that consistently leads you down the path of falling off your nutrition protocol, and that might be in your house, that might be at your desk, that might be in the office space, take ownership of your environment, because your environment is going to influence your behavior. Mm-hmm. And I think that the next piece is understanding that you want to remove the triggers from your environment, the foods that trigger you to fall off track, and then you want to add in new foods to your environment. So if you are someone who struggles to eat consistently healthy at the office, put in some lean deli meats that are healthy for you. Bring in hard-boiled eggs or carrots and cucumbers. Put in apples. Bring an extra packet of tuna. Whatever your jam is, man. Have fun with it. But figure out how you can start to optimize for you to follow through. Mm-hmm. Because your environment is going to influence you more than you realize. And the more that you become aware of it, the easier it is to change.
Totally agree. I think it's really hard to just remove things without adding something else in. That's a key point of habit change. So I think those are some really great examples, just making some swaps. You can't change what everybody else is eating, especially in that office environment, but you can change what's in your own house, and you can change what you bring with you and what you put in your own body. Mm-hmm. You just have to be intentional with it and not try to willpower your way there. Bring things that you enjoy, and that would be helpful for you to stay on course, right? Feel like you're fueling and taking care of yourself. We hope that this is helpful. Mm-hmm. That's kind of our 5-step take to really changing your healthy habits or creating healthy habits with your nutrition. This is pretty much everything that you need to know in order to create results, to optimize your health, to energize yourself as you go into 2024. And we are always here for questions and happy to answer. The best place to contact us and find us is in our free Facebook group called Energy Secrets for Business Owners. This is a group that we open up to our community, our audiences, and we'd love to have you be a part of it if you've been listening to the podcast. There is a link in the show notes. This is, again, a free group. It's just a part of you coming into our community and making those connections with people who are ambitious and focused just like you, but really want to put value on their health. So grab the link in the show notes, apply to be a part of the group. You do have to fill out membership questions, but it's short and sweet and easy, and then we can actually connect with you one-on-one. So be sure to find us there, ask your questions, and for now, go ahead and implement some of these strategies we've shared with you to optimize your nutrition in 2024.
And on that note, let's get after it. We'll see you in the group. Let's conquer your day. Cheers.
Cheers.